Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a massive question, maybe one of the biggest of our time. Why are some countries so incredibly rich while others are so poor? How did our world get so unequal? Well, the answer is a wild story that's been unfolding for the last 500 years.
Okay, let's just dive right in and look at the scale of this gap. Back in 1820, the richest places in the world were maybe, 3 or 4 times wealthier than the poorest. But fast forward to today, and that gap has become a giant chasm. By 2008, the average person in what we call a Western offshoot, think the US, Canada, Australia, was making over 18 times more than someone in sub-Saharan Africa. It's not just a gap, it's a completely different economic reality.
So what on earth happened? How did we get here? This giant widening gap is what economic historians call the Great Divergence. And honestly, it's the central mystery of our modern world. To solve it, we have to rewind the clock, back to a time when the economic map of the world looked nothing like it does today.
And get this chart just completely flips what you might expect. In 1750, Asia was the absolute powerhouse of world manufacturing. China and India alone produced over half of everything. But then look what happens by 1913. Their share just collapses, down to a tiny 5%. And in that same time, Europe and the US rocketed up to produce a staggering 3/4 of the world's goods. This wasn't just a small shift, it was a total, dramatic reversal of fortune on a global scale.
So, to understand how that massive reversal happened, we have to start our story in one particular place, 18th century Britain. Because this is where a very unique, and you could even say almost accidental, recipe for creating wealth was first cooked up, and it would change everything.
So what was so special about Britain? Well, it came down to this bizarre economic environment that just didn't exist anywhere else on Earth. On one hand, British workers had surprisingly high wages, which meant labor was expensive. But at the exact same time, Britain was sitting on mountains of easily accessible coal, giving it the cheapest energy in the world. And that combination, expensive people and cheap power, that was the secret ingredient.
You see, this combination created a powerful financial reason to innovate that had never existed before. For the first time in human history, it actually made business sense. It was profitable to spend a ton of money inventing and building machines. Why? Because those machines could replace your expensive human workers with cheap, coal-powered energy. That simple economic logic is what directly sparked inventions like the steam engine and the mechanical spinner. And that right there is the start of the Industrial Revolution.
And this quote just nails the other side of the story. Why didn't this happen in, say, China or India? Well, they were stuck in what economists call a poverty trap. Think about it. When your labor force is huge and people work for next to nothing, it's always cheaper to just hire more people. Why would you spend a fortune on some newfangled machine when you can just hire 10 more workers for pennies? There was simply no economic reason to innovate.
Okay, so Britain gets this huge head start. Its industrial engine is roaring, and the rest of the world is left scrambling to figure out what to do. The 20th century basically became this giant, chaotic laboratory, with different countries all desperately trying out new economic recipes to try and catch up.
You see, the old 19th century system, the one we call laissez-faire, which is basically pure free market capitalism, it was completely shattered by the First World War and then the Great Depression. Its collapse left this huge vacuum, and that kicked off a frantic, sometimes radical search for a new way to run a modern economy.
So first, you had that old recipe, laissez-faire. The whole idea here was for the government to just step back, protect private property, make sure trade is free, and then just let the market do its thing.
But in reaction to that, some countries swung to a totally different idea called economic dirigism. Here, the state doesn't just step back. It grabs the steering wheel. It seizes control of the economy to force it towards big national goals, like military power or becoming self-sufficient.
And then, at the furthest extreme, you had the Soviet model, central planning. This recipe didn't just steer the market, it threw the market out the window entirely. Private property was gone, and the state planned every single aspect of the economy in a brutal, top-down push to industrialize as fast as possible.
So you've got all these competing ideas clashing on the world stage. Pure free markets, total state control, and everything in between. The big question is, which of these recipes actually worked? Which ones really helped countries close that massive economic gap with the West?
Well, looking back, historians basically see 2 main playbooks that actually got results. The first is the Standard Model, which countries like Germany and the USA used in the 19th century. This involved protecting your new industries with tariffs, setting up big banks to fund huge projects, and really investing in education for everyone. The other successful playbook was the Big Push. This is where the government itself coordinates a massive, all-at-once investment to basically jumpstart industrialization. The Soviet Union did this, and so did post-war Japan, but in a very different, non-communist way.
But for the countries that were already wealthy, the winning recipe after World War II was actually a creative blend of ideas. Western Europe in particular developed what we now call the mixed economy. It was this brilliant mashup, right? It kept the energy and competition of free markets, but added in a lot of government guidance, some nationalized industries, and a strong welfare state to make sure everyone was looked after. And the results? They were absolutely stunning. This era, from the 50s to the mid-70s, is often called the Golden Age, and for good reason. Just look at this chart. It shows how the mixed economy allowed Western Europe to dramatically close the productivity gap with the United States. It led to decades of the best economic growth and shared prosperity the world had ever seen.
But, no recipe works forever. By the 1970s, that golden age started to fizzle out. The oil crisis hit, growth just stopped, and prices started soaring. It was this horrible new problem called stagflation. And as you can see here, one of the worst symptoms was unemployment, which just kept climbing and climbing. This crisis completely shattered people's confidence in that mixed economy model that had worked so well for so long.
So this crisis in the 1970s set off another huge shift in thinking. It led to a rejection of that post-war recipe, and basically paved the way for the super-globalized world that we all live in today. And what's fascinating is that the new recipe that took over was, in a lot of ways, a return to a much older idea. Under this new banner of globalization, governments started to deregulate their markets, tear down the walls that stopped money from flowing across borders, and generally reduce the role of the state in the economy. It was, for all intents and purposes, a new, supercharged version of laissez-faire for the modern world.
And this just unleashed a tidal wave of money all around the planet. I mean, the scale of the change was just unbelievable. Look at this number. The value of money being traded every single day exploded from around $140 billion in 1950 to over $2.7 trillion by 1995. This massive, free-flowing river of cash is what allowed huge multinational companies to build the complex global supply chains that define our world today.
So, when you step back and look at the whole story, you see this incredible cycle. The world has swung from one big idea to another, from the free markets of the 19th century through this whole century of dramatic, state-led experiments, and then all the way back to a new age of global markets. The world we live in is the result of this epic, centuries-long tug-of-war between these competing economic recipes.
And that leaves us right here, today, with the final, really big thought. We've seen all these grand recipes for creating wealth come and go, right? Each had its moment, its successes, and its failures. So as we face the massive, unique challenges of our century, from climate change to soaring inequality, is the recipe we have now really the final answer? Or is history telling us that we might just be on the verge of the next great economic experiment?